Aziz Anaman, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this very special episode of A Soldier Speaks exclusive. And today I've got here with me my friend Tony Gosling, joining us from Bristol. Tony, welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody.
So, Tony, before we start, let me give a brief premise. A few weeks earlier, I was in Bristol, and the vibe in Bristol it was very independent because once we were sitting there, I was invited by Tony Gosling, and at his radio show, the kind of stuff they were saying, I asked them, well, this kind of stuff can get you in trouble in the UK, but Tony did not simply give, he simply didn't care about it. And he said certain things in response, which I'm not going to, talk about right now, because Tony's got the white advantage. I haven't got that. So yeah, Tony can say all those things to you, but the white. The next day we were having this lunch. Me, my better half, Tony, his lady wife. We were having this lunch, and we had this. Big, huge congregation supporting Palestine going on and about.
Right.
I haven't seen anything like that. Maybe in London, nowhere else. I've traveled everywhere in the UK. But the vibe of that city, I was told, is due to people like Tony Gosling, who are leaders of the freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of press. And he has been working with the BBC. I would ask Tony to please introduce himself to all of you before we move on to very relevant topics. But I'll introduce you to the topics after Tony has introduced himself. And while Tony will be introducing himself, I'll be showing you a couple of books written by Tony. And I would request you to go to bibelo.co.uk if you're interested in buying those books. Over to you, Tony, please.
Yeah, or they're available on eBay too. But look, okay. As for me, I was brought up in a family business in aviation, and really enjoyed it as a teenager, and my early 20s, working on airfields, mostly in civil aviation, and with business jets and flying clubs. So that's how I got my sort of start after studying English, and I was brought up in southeast London. Biggin Hill was where we were based at the airport there, which was the big it was the airfield which launched more successful fighter Hurricane and Spitfire attacks on the Nazi Luftwaffe raiders of the Blitz. So they had more kills from that airfield than anywhere else. And that's where we were based. And this is back in the 1980s. So that's how I kind of got started. But I'd also got into campaigning and land rights. I was always very interested in human rights. So I was trying to make sure that when we were selling aircraft parts, they weren't going to dictatorships and that sort of thing. So the idea is we've got an ethical business here. And it was successful at the time. British owned, and of course the aviation business was massive after the Second World War in Britain. We were producing loads of aircraft. I think it's Filton Airfield in Bristol. More aircraft than anywhere else on the planet were flying out of Filton, because they were being assembled elsewhere and also built elsewhere and assembled in Filton during the war. So I got aviation in my blood in a way. So I then got out of that because I was sort of bored with it really, and into journalism, and started working in 1989 for the BBC in central London at a very busy newsroom in an exciting station which the BBC called Greater London Radio. The BBC had set it up to compete with the commercials, very successful LBC and Capital Radio. And so we had a bit of an experiment in a way for a few years there, where the BBC was behaving much more populist, so we were kind of a tabloidy style radio station with a mix of quite a lot of sort of indie and rock music in the early 1990s, and some quite well-known people, DJs like Tommy Vance, Johnny Walker, were really popular. And the people listening to us in London they really were in their many millions listening in London to us. knew we were on their side. They just knew, because these DJs were used to working with crowds, but suddenly they were doing hard news interviews as well. And it was great fun, and it was, I think, a massive success. But the BBC pulled the plug on it a few years afterwards. So that's how I got started as a researcher, and then carried on as a journalist. And then I was just sacked. Basically, they said they've run out of money. Although I was quite suspicious about the fact that we'd been pursuing stories in Salisbury, in Wiltshire, about child sexual abuse at children's homes. So I've no idea if that was why I was relieved of my job, but it was where Ted Heath was living, the former British Prime Minister. So that's a basic introduction to me. We're now doing a show in Bristol. We have been since 2008, every week, which is a couple of hours or 3 hours, sometimes even last night 4 hours, which is a weekly podcast which looks at local news, national news, and international news. And also we do a bit of a section on the occult. So the idea of secret societies, evil, basically, which seems to be a dimension to me which is entirely lacking from the mainstream media. So you very kindly put the book up there, The Siege of Heaven Reader, which really looks at the history of secret government in Britain and around the world, but mainly here in Britain, ever since the English Civil War, because we had a coup in the English Civil War with Oliver Cromwell and the merchant classes, the capitalists taking over from the feudal classes, which leads on to what we're going to be talking about, which is the British Empire, because the empire wouldn't have been possible without the industrialists, their dark satanic mills producing the equipment needed, the ships, etc., to go out and bully our way around the world in Britain. And one other thing I did get involved in for a few years in the 90s, late 90s, after the BBC, was land rights campaigning and organising mass trespasses, mass occupations in London and elsewhere, where, for example, in Wandsworth, we took over a big site next to Wandsworth Bridge where there was a whole load of expensive housing and a massive supermarket being planned. Well, there's nowhere for the ordinary local people. And so we just took it over and saying, where's your council housing? Where's your affordable housing? And eventually, we got evicted from there. But we made the point right across London. The idea is to put these things onto the agenda, is that housing and government should be there to fight the corner for the people that are falling between the gaps, where the rich and the powerful are just running the show, Adil.
Tony, is journalism? I know it's not exactly the topic, but I want to get you pick your brains in as brief time as possible. Is journalism a dying profession, considering that AI is taking over journalism? Personally, I don't believe that journalists can be replaced by AI, because AI is fed in the information. Journalists have got their own intelligence, God-gifted intelligence. It cannot be replaced. They've got their sources. They cannot be replaced. But there is a continuing discontent amongst the colleagues in the National Union of Journalists about the AI taking over journalism. And of course, the occult, the government, which you're talking about, the one who are actually the top 1% running the rest 99 or 90% of the world. Do you believe they're going to succeed in taking over journalism?
Well, journalism isn't quite dying. I mean, it's being slowly strangled on the mainstream. But of course, the idea really is that the mainstream media now in the West is for the stupid people. And that much of the intelligent debate is going on online. Now, of course, online is trackable. It's also quite easy to close it down. And so I think basically what's happened is we have been corralled onto social media. There's an attempt to police everything we do on social media, which is much easier than it used to be. And so, yes, you're right. Journalism has been killed off. What you find is people like Peter Mandelson. I mean, this was what was going on when I was in journalism, is people were getting calls, editors were getting calls from Mandelson saying, get rid of this journalist. And so you've ended up with a mainstream press, which very few people trust anymore. So they've been sort of moved on to, but there are a few people like me still around. There's a very good program, the Crispin Flintoff Show, I would also recommend Richie Allen, who does a weekly program from Salford in Manchester. There are a few, but then there's lots of controlled opposition too. So the people who are trying to look like they are an alternative media, where actually they are really just an outlet for the deep state in one way or another. So it's a very contested. I would like to see, and this is my honest, the National Union of Journalists. I've been on the New Media Industrial Council now for something like 15 years, discussing all these issues about AI. And as AI started to come along, I've been sort of elbowed out of the New Media Industrial Council. And this is a great pity for me. I mean, it's like the union is slowly being subsumed by AI itself. There is a bit of a debate, but nowhere near as fierce enough criticism, because journalist jobs are, of course, being totally destroyed and undermined by artificial intelligence, which is totally programmed. I did an experiment actually where a couple of books, which were in my other book, which I happen to have here, which is all about the end game of the Second World War, where with Winston Churchill's private secretary doing deals with Adolf Hitler's private secretary. So there's a couple of important books. Yeah, that's it. There are a couple of important books I used to write that. And I thought, well, let's just feed those into AI and to see if AI can figure out the key bits in these books. And so I actually asked AI, what do you think are the most important points being made in these books? And of course, there's nothing in the AI response at all to understand the importance of, for example, the specific links between Churchill and Hitler in the negotiations before the end of the Second World War. And so it's I think absolutely useless. It's totally artificial, really. It's for lazy people, people who just can't be bothered to actually read through. And so, no, it's no replacement for journalism at all. All it is it's another way of replacing real journalists. And so, yes, journalism is under attack. You're absolutely right.
So today we've got two very important topics, which is since you can see the flag behind me, the flag of the United Kingdom, the Union Jack, and Pakistani flag. And Pakistan has been a colony of the British Empire. All right. So first topic I wanted to explore with you is, and the second topic is interconnected. So I'll come to that later. The first topic is that what we are witnessing as a geopolitical analyst and as a journalist, what we are witnessing is that the British Empire, which effectively started disintegrating after the Second World War because of the promises they had made with the colonies that if they will help them in the Second World War, they will get their freedom. I'm talking about the subcontinent of India and Pakistan. Later, Bangladesh turned up as well. Well, they did fulfill those promises, but the British Empire left behind a legacy of fault lines globally. And those fault lines, for example, Kashmir, is still keeping the United Kingdom relevant, United Kingdom's foreign policy relevant in a way that the United Kingdom is, it is performing the role of a bridge between the US global hegemony or the US empire or the new empire and the rest of the world.
Well, so yeah, this is not British. This isn't just a British thing. Okay, so think of Taiwan, think of Korea, because the Americans have learned from the British. Now, I think to understand the British Empire, I know it's maybe not what you want or expect, but I think we have to go back to the reign of Elizabeth I, because this is where it really started. I came across a fascinating article from the Royal Observatory, no, it's the Greenwich Maritime Museum in Greenwich, by the deputy curator there, all about a chap called John Dee, where he discovered an old book which had been published in the 16th century and been kept secret, all about how to build an empire, written by John Dee. John Dee was the 007. He was a sort of Secret Service agent and occultist friend of Elizabeth I. And so what they'd done at that time is they had set in train a secret plan to build an empire. And then what happened about 100 years later, I mean, that was at the time of the Reformation, of course, as they were breaking up all the monasteries and consolidating the power in the hands